Welcome to the Feehery podcast, brought to you by EFB Advocacy. EFB means excellent for business. I'm joined by my colleagues John Easton, the E, Adam Belmar, the B, and Ram Upaluri, a longtime friend, a avid watcher of the show, a former candidate for Congress, a former staffer for Congressman Jim Cooper and Al Gore, and most importantly, father to Adam Upaluri, who is a proud graduate of St. Peter's School, where our kids go, two of our kids go, and a baseball player for the Gonzaga Junior Varsity baseball team. Ram, welcome to the Feehery podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here.
We are glad to have you, and we're going to get right to the theories. Theory one, the speaker is gone. Long live the speaker. Paul Ryan announced that he was retiring at the end of this Congress, putting the Republican leadership in a mess. Everyone's thinking that the Republicans now, their majority is completely doomed. I'd like to just spend a little time talking about what's going on with Republican leadership and the Democratic leadership, and if this really does mean that the end is nigh for the Republican majority. John Easton, I'll start with you. Talking about Paul Ryan, good speaker, nice guy, idealist, got some big accomplishments done, but, he only was there for 2.5 years.
Yeah, and I agree with you on all those counts that he was those things, which I think made him somebody very good for the party. I think that, and if you take a step back as to why, I think part of it is because this was a speaker, an individual who knows who he is, who has a solid compass, didn't try to pretend to be something he wasn't, a devoted family man, a man of faith, but who wasn't sanctimonious, who didn't proselytize, wasn't really big on religious issues. You just knew that was he was a very grounded individual, and I think partially because of that, he wasn't somebody that you could demonize. He actually was a little difficult for Democrats because I think the first thing you want to do is find a devil to pound on every single day. Let's face it, the Republicans have that in Nancy Pelosi. They use her every single election cycle, I think, in some cases, to great effect. And you couldn't do that with Paul Ryan. He is certainly my kind of leader, just because he's such a solid individual, very likable, and can communicate for the party.
The great thing about having Ram on the show is we actually have a Democrat who could speak for what the Democrats really believe about Paul Ryan.
About that.
And if you could talk a little bit about what you thought about Paul Ryan, and also, your views of your own leadership and what's going to happen there.
I think he was a attractive figure, Paul Ryan, friendly, and hard to say anything too negative about him. As a citizen, he was a likable guy. But this looks a lot to me like surrender. It looks a lot like kind of giving up without maybe going into too much detail about what exactly is going to transpire or how it's going to transpire. I think Democrats are feeling emboldened. Mm-hmm. Republicans may be feeling a little deflated. And I think this is a reflection of that.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. Adam,
no, I don't.
Well, please give us your view.
Look, I appreciate that folks are looking at this and trying to see a really large narrative. But when I hear folks say that this looks like defeat, I'm thinking to myself, how is that possible? In every organization, there needs to be new blood and regeneration. This speaker has done his job. He's leaving. He let people know in advance that he's leaving. And P.S., the thing that should be concerning Republicans is we've got 46 some odd incumbents who are taking their leave. I don't think any Republican should be thinking after such a robust win in 2016, taking the presidency back from the Democrats, that they're ceding control of the House just because Ryan's leaving. I just reject that.
Let me Ram, I'm going to let you respond to that, but I want to say, I agree with you, Adam, in the sense that I don't think Ryan's leaving has much to do with Republicans and whether they win or lose in the fall. I think that Ryan's leaving has a lot to do with he doesn't like Donald Trump, and he doesn't like the job, and he never really liked the job. And he's still, for most of his career, he slept in his office, which is remarkable to me. You're Speaker of the House, you're sleeping in your office in Longworth, and his kids are going to college, and we all know worries about college costs. And he said, Ron, that he wants to be the ambassador to Ireland, which I thought was pretty funny. You can't be ambassador to Ireland unless you have a lot of money. And so I look at Paul Ryan, and I think this idealist who was mugged by reality, which is, if you're a Speaker of the House, the one thing that you do, and I've worked for a Speaker for a long time, you're mugged by reality because you get all kinds of crap all the time. And talking about mugged by reality, I mean, look at Nancy Pelosi. I mean, Nancy Pelosi has her ideals, but there's quite often the time where she had to kind of schedule things that she didn't want to schedule. And I think that Paul Ryan was in the same boat. Talk a little bit about Nancy Pelosi and, how she reacts to someone like Paul Ryan. Do the Democrats kind of feel like they've got this thing won now?
Well, I think if you're a Democrat, you have to believe that Nancy Pelosi has been a very effective leader.
Right.
Despite the criticism, despite the politics, the optics of getting behind Nancy Pelosi, Connor Lamb is a great example of a Democrat who has been successful running against the leader. So I think there's that element out there right now. Democrats are gonna gauge their local situation and run with her or against her. But everybody knows. I mean, I think everybody feels that Nancy Pelosi has been effective as a leader.
Yeah, and to pick up on that, I would actually very much agree with that. I know not as much as Rom and other Democrats about Nancy Pelosi, but what I've observed, just kind of being from an arm's length, is one of the reasons why she is still in the leadership role that she is because she runs such a tight ship. That she does the job very, very well. But you have to give your caucus members the ability to go out and do what they need to do in their district to win, and then you come back and you figure out who's going to be speaker, who's going to be leader. But she has been very impressive. I just think sometimes her politics, her ideology sometimes can get a little out of whack with what is needed in a lot of these districts across the country. So I think there's a lot of tension there, actually, for somebody like a Nancy Pelosi coming out of Marin County. Is that where she comes from? Marin County, right out of San Francisco.
So I agree with you. I think what Pelosi has been magnificent, though, is being in touch and in tune with the vast majority of her minority. And when it was the majority, it was a majority. And that's why she's been able to keep. She's also the top fundraiser by leaps and bounds for the Democrats, and that's important for any leadership person. The thing that's interesting about Paul Ryan is he is a Boy Scout. He's very idealistic, and I think that he had a little bit more of a difficult time with the changing Republican Party, Adam Belmar, that was a party of George W. Bush and now is a party of Donald Trump. And, what to make? I mean, if you see Donald Trump and you're kind of like this Boy Scout, I mean, let's face it, Donald Trump's no Boy Scout.
And remember, he was the running mate of Mitt Romney.
Right, exactly.
Well, I think all of what you just said is right, and I also pay special attention to your point about raising money being a really critical part of being a leader of either party, especially in the House. But I do think that the Speaker, Ryan, he laid this out, this thing that you're talking about of not being comfortable with the Republican Party or maybe not even the leadership of Donald Trump. And yet he took exception with Trump during the campaign at critical moments where he said, you've gone too far, or that's not acceptable. And yet at the same time, he found a way to lead the president's policy agenda on the Hill. I find his work there to be really successful. I think it's very positive. And I wonder out loud here how much of this is about being with kids and about making some money, and how much of it is thinking about a future political reality from which he needs distance from Donald Trump and this party. He said he's never going to run for office again. I don't believe that. And I wouldn't hold it to him.
I do believe that.
You do?
I think he's done. I think he's done. I think the next time he's in political office, he will be an ambassador to Ireland. I don't think that he's going to be run for president. I really don't.
Well, isn't it time, Rom, that Democrats think about inspiring their minority or majority in the House with a new leader, isn't it time that some fresh leadership come in there? And do you think that's something that's going to happen in the next 12 months after this next election?
So I think what's happening is Democrats are not running personality-driven campaigns this year. They're staying in, especially in red states, and I'm from a red state.
Right.
I'm a red state Democrat. I'm high on red state Democrats this year, and one of the things that I'm seeing out of these red state Democrats is they're not running personality-driven campaigns. They're not getting behind the leadership publicly for political purpose, and they're not really attacking the other side for political purpose. They're running as pragmatists. They're running as people who can get the job done, who can serve the people effectively. So I think the decision on Speaker Pelosi may be a decision that comes after the election.
I'm sure it will. I'm just saying, if you want to take a look at what's stale and what's old and what is not necessarily in keeping with where I see, and I'm not a Democrat, but the real energy of the Democratic Party, it's not embodied by Nancy Pelosi anymore.
No, but it's not. It's where the energy is coming from in the Democratic Party right now, like we haven't seen in about 20 years or more. It's coming from the grassroots.
Yeah.
It's percolating up.
Yeah.
It's coming out of the counties. It's coming up through the old parties that have gotten the county party structures that have gotten kind of moribund over the last 25 years are now suddenly coming back to life in states like Tennessee.
Well, we'll see on a national level, because I think we were starting on the Republican side. We're starting to wonder post George W. Bush, where were we? We had obviously Mitt Romney was unsuccessful. It would have been interesting to see the party of Mitt Romney. I don't know even what that would have looked like. So we were actually adrift, and all of a sudden, and we thought maybe it'd come from a senator, or a former governor, or current governor. All of a sudden, wham! We just got whipsawed by this populist force, this TV celebrity, real estate magnate, and we are where we are. I couldn't even predict who is going to be the next Democratic force, and is it going to kind of come from, this sort of weird place that you can't even see right now, because you have this whole presidential, we call it the presidential caucus in the Senate, the Kamala Harris, the Bernie Sanders, the Cory Booker, and on and on. And I'm not sure it's going to come from that side. But it still is sort of the party of Hillary Clinton and Nancy Pelosi right now.
Well, it's a party that has to, out of necessity, move beyond. I mean, it can't deny, but it has to move beyond the big name, leaders of the past.
All right, we're going to get to this a little bit later. Let's talk a little bit about the timing of this, and I just want to talk about my own experience. I worked for a lame duck leader when I worked for Bob Michael. He announced that he was retiring around the same time that Paul Ryan did in his tenure, and it was excruciating to be in the leadership and have Newt Gingrich basically run everything around you, especially if you were a staffer. I ended up leaving fairly early, I think it was August that I left, because it's kind of everyone in the leader's office was looking for a job. Yeah. You don't want to be the last guy who has to do all the archive stuff, because that's a lot of work. You don't want to turn the lights off. And so I thought that was very interesting for Paul Ryan to announce so early on. And now he's a lame duck. And, Adam, thinking about lame ducks, you worked for a lame duck president. Mm-hmm. It's a different thing, because people they respect the job and they respect you, but they don't fear you because they know you're leaving.
Yeah, and there was a real parallel that Speaker Ryan offered to all of us yesterday. When I was working for George W. Bush, the mantra was sprint to the finish. We're sprinting to the finish. Yesterday it was we're going to run through the tape.
Right.
Okay. But either way, you both are sprinting to the finish, and I know you didn't want to use the same language, but it is respective of the idiosyncrasies of being a lame duck leader. But you've got to show that in just the same way. Also, I will say that Congressman Ryan said, I can't look in the eyes of the people in my district and say I'm going to run for re-election, knowing full well that I'm going to resign. And I think there's some intellectual honesty there. John Easton's been talking to me about it this week too, and I'm sure I respect that. I think party-wide, as hard as it is for the people who are now having to deal with the fallout of this, there's something truly intellectually honest about saying, you know what, I'm hanging it up, I'm telling you in advance, and I'm not going to lie to the voters.
All right, I'm going to close this up. I want you both to predict who will be the leaders of the two, all of you to predict who will be the leaders of the two parties, either speaker or leader, John Easton, coming next November. Who's going to be speaker and who's going to be the leader?
Who's going to be speaker? I think it's likely Nancy Pelosi will be speaker. I think she stays leader, whether it goes Republican or Democrat. But boy, it is an uphill battle to keep it in Republican control. And the leader on the Republican side, I just think, given his relationship with Donald Trump, I have to give it to Kevin McCarthy.
Ron.
You know, I want to say Nancy Pelosi, but I think you also have to open up the field a little bit. It's quite possible that a Tim Ryan who has tried, who has challenged Nancy Pelosi this last time around, will challenge her again, and who knows, he might be able to rile up some of the base around the mantra for change. Change may not be a bad thing for the Democratic Party. It might be good to open it up a little bit and create.
Okay, who's going to be the Republican leader?
I have to put my money on Kevin McCarthy.
Okay.
I say Republicans hold McCarthy is speaker, and Steny Hoyer finally gets a bite at being minority leader for a little while.
You were close. It's going to be Kevin McCarthy, and Joe Crowley will be the Democratic leader. Joe's got all the base, and he's the moderate face, and he's a personal friend, so I think it'll be Joe. Issue 2, impeachment fever. So the FBI invaded Michael Cohen's office. He's the lawyer for President Trump, and they carted off all kinds of stuff having to do with Access Hollywood tapes, which you're like, well, how does that have to do with Mueller? Now, thinking in my head, what I think was eventually going to happen is Trump's going to fire Mueller or Rod Rosenstein, one of those two. Mueller's going to be, because I think he's gone far afield. And I think that's going to mobilize the Democrats to make impeachment the number one issue for them in this campaign. And that's why I want to talk about the impeachment theater. Ron, am I wrong?
Well, I have a few thoughts about this. These special prosecutors, we saw here in the District of Columbia that a prosecutor looking into Vince Gray's campaign, who was a one-term mayor here, largely because of this cloud that was hanging over him during virtually the entire time of his one term in office. It just took all of the air out of his campaign. He was not reelected. Muriel Bowser has come in and appears to be cruising to a reelection here. So special prosecutors can have a political impact. In this case, I'm not sure this special prosecutor is changing anybody's mind. I don't see Trump supporters backing off of their support because of what the special prosecutor is doing, and I see a lot of Democrats who are riled up about it, but they were always against Trump. So I don't necessarily see this prosecutor changing the political equation. Last thing I'll say is this. In blue states, I think the Cohen chapter episode is red meat.
Right.
But in red states among Democrats, I'm not sure it changes anything. Red state Democrats are running hard, to win. Red state Republicans are strongly behind the president. I'm not sure that it actually changes anything.
I think you're right. I think that's exactly the right analysis. My question to you is, will this inspire the Democrats to make impeachment a bigger deal in their campaigns?
If he fires, I see what you're saying.
If he fires Mueller.
I think that has the potential to change the political equation. Right now, it's not affecting the president,
right,
in my opinion. But if he does do that, it's not really knowable, but I think it could change the political equation and to his detriment.
Yeah, John Easton.
I think it's a bit of a trap for Democrats. I think that, I don't know if not that many people know who Rod Rosenstein is, and I think people are getting to know Mueller quite well. So I could see Rod Rosenstein getting fired, and then there's a little bit of generally in the electorate, I'm not sure that really moves people, but with the Democratic candidates, it's hard for them not to. And I say that in part because the media is just so obsessed with this. And the media and let's face it, and the Democrats are a little bit intertwined.
And the Never Trumpers.
And the Never Trumpers. So I do think that it's bad for them if they go down this path, the impeachment path. I think a lot of them will. I think Rahm is right on the red state Democrats. They've got to walk this tightrope of keeping some support among Trump voters, and then also, bringing in independent voters. Well, a lot of Trump voters are independent voters, but keeping their Democrats, but also picking off some of those Trump voters. So they're not going down the impeachment path. No way. If they do, I think that's a fatal mistake. But I think it is a trap for a lot of Democrats.
Adam, what do you think?
Well, I think that there's a real order of operations here. Mueller has a charge, figure out and tell us what happened in the 2016 election and the intrusion by the Russians. It's splintered. There's a lot of stuff going on. We don't see the whole picture. If the President of the United States fires Mueller, that will be the second most enormous mistake he could possibly make. Comey was the one that launched this thing. Yeah. The next one will be unrecoverable. But to what Easton and Rahm said about the politics of impeachment in the 2018 midterm election, I think that it would be a critical mistake for the Democrats to presage that as a running tactic. It will inspire Democrats. I think that's right. But you know who it could possibly also inspire? Republicans who historically any party that elects a president is going to recede in the upcoming midterm election. Well, the guys who came out and mass to elect Donald Trump would probably be more infused with energy to get to the polls in November if they felt this was a referendum on his presidency in terms of impeachment. Make that the key issue. I think you've got a much larger fundamental fight, and that would be a mistake for Democrats.
This is my history with this. I was working for Tom DeLay when we were deciding to impeach Bill Clinton over an investigation that initially started into Whitewater and then devolved into an investigation over the fact that Bill Clinton lied about sex. Wow, that became the issue. Now, it wasn't about the sex, it was about the lying about the sex. Well, you know what? It's the same damn thing. Yeah. And I remember sitting in leadership meetings when Newt Gingrich confidently predicted we were going to pick up 70 seats because the American people really cared about Bill Clinton's lying about sex. At the same time, everyone gets the irony here, right? And how Denny Hastert eventually became speaker is because everyone was lying about sex. I'll leave it at that. So if this devolves into an investigation over Michael Cohen trying to keep stories out of the press about Trump's perfectly legal dalliances with porn stars, not moral, not great, not acceptable in the prurient world we live in, but he did what he did. And not that surprising that Michael Cohen would try to keep it out of the press. If Mueller's investigations and ultimately a Department of Justice investigation that says, or whatever happens in the Southern District of New York, that this somehow becomes a campaign finance violation because Cohen was trying to help President Trump, win the election by not having these stories come out about his, porn star dalliance. I don't think the American people are going to be that in favor of Mueller anymore. Democrats are going to have no choice. If Trump fires Mueller, which I think he's going to do at some point in time, I think that the Republican base will strongly support Trump over Mueller because they support him no matter what. I think that it makes it very, very difficult for mainstream Republicans like Mitch McConnell or Paul Ryan to support Trump on that because they are institutionalists, and it just puts them in a very difficult spot. That being said, and so the Democrats will have no choice but to run on impeachment. We've got to get rid of this guy. And I think that ultimately it'll cause a Republican base, it'll put the Republican Party in a very difficult situation, and the Republican base is going to say, screw Mueller. And I see all this happening, and maybe I might be wrong, and hopefully it doesn't turn out this way, but that's why I think impeachment could be a critical issue. And my only point is when, for the Republicans, if they run on protecting Trump and on an economic message, they will be much better off, because I remember Republicans, when they impeached Clinton, had nothing but the impeachment message, and it was a disaster. And to Brahm's point, what the American people want is they want the government to work. And when Democrats run pragmatic, the reason why they're winning these races at the local level is they're offering pragmatic candidates, and we're offering wingbats. And that's why they're winning. If we start having pragmatic candidates, I think we'll do a much better job. And that's a long, I'm sorry it's long, but that's my theory.
Is there a theory? That was a theory.
That was my long theory. Anyone want to comment on that? Ram?
I think, having lived through the Clinton impeachment proceeding, and I was working in the Clinton administration at the time, and we thought we were doing great work for the country, and it was frustrating to watch the country come to a grinding halt around these proceedings, and to go home and have conversations with my own wife about how inappropriate Bill Clinton's behavior was.
Right.
And it certainly was, and it was impossible to defend. But that wasn't the conversation we wanted to be having. We wanted to be having the conversation about all the great things we were doing for the country, and we were doing great things for the country. The budget had come into balance. We were running a small surplus. The country was at peace. The economy was doing well, even though we were in a bit of a bubble. 9/11 had not occurred yet. It was a very frustrating time, and it's frustrating to me, not just as a Democrat, but really as an American citizen, to watch these special prosecutions sprawl,
right,
like kudzu,
Yeah.
as we say in the South, and with no apparent limits on it. And there maybe ought to be limits on, when a special prosecutor is charged with looking into Russian meddling, and then B, the question of collusion. Maybe that ought to be what they look into, and if they want to look into something else, maybe they ought to get another authorization for it.
Yeah,
And maybe there ought to be a time limit put on these
Isn't
things.
that where this whole thing started? This special counsel is looking into Russian collusion.
And which is why Mark Zuckerberg was at the Energy and Commerce Committee and the Senate this week, was about Russian collusion, basically.
That's right, and that's a fantastic. That was a fantastic hearing, I thought, yesterday in front of the House, and it was getting into a lot of really, what is Facebook? I mean, a lot of really interesting questions about, if you wanted to regulate it, would you regulate it as a media company, an aerospace company? What would you want to regulate it as? So these open-ended special prosecutions, I think, create problems for our democracy.
I agree with that.
I just want to jump in because I just feel like I have to say this. I'm not saying it to be contrarian, but I honestly believe that, if you're doing a home inspection and you find mold, you should figure out where else there's mold. They went in looking for one thing. They found some really unfortunate activity that's going on the part of other folks. And I honestly believe that Mueller decided had to consult with Rosenstein and others before, and turn it over to the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York before they could do this no-knock warrant. If there was reason to do it and there was approval to do it, then let it be done. And I'm not necessarily thinking that it's indicative of sprawl and overreach until we know the whole story. It's a story that has to be told. Whether you fire Mueller and let the next guy tell it or not, this story is going to be told.
Can I just say one more thing? I think that is the reality in which we live. And yes, the investigation is going to proceed, and they will either find high crimes and misdemeanors or not. To me, the preferable solution is always the political one. Let the voters decide which direction they want the country to go in after November. And I think the voters are going to decide it. I'm hoping that it'll be somewhat independent of the investigation. It will play as a political issue, especially if he fires Mueller.
Yeah.
I think he'll be making it a political issue. He'll be daring the American voters to come after him, and I believe they'll take him up on that dare.
But I think to your point about the sprawl and how it begins to touch every portion of our government here in Washington. I was just before we came into this podcast, I was watching on CNN. They were carrying live the nomination hearing of Mike Pompeo to be Secretary of State. and it was Senator Menendez's turn, and what he was solely focusing in on wasn't the situation in the Middle East.
Senator Menendez.
Senator, what do I say?
You know, I'm just saying the irony there.
Oh, right. Senator
Yeah, I was like, we're not going to touch Menendez.
and so he wasn't, honing it. Now, this is the ranking member of the Foreign Relations Committee. He's the top Democrat. And he wasn't honing in on the Middle East, North Korea, Russia. He wanted to know from the nominee to be Secretary of State, who is the CIA director, had Mueller contacted him? Had he interviewed him? Did he tell him not to speak about their meeting at this hearing? That's what we were talking about. I to Rom's point, it's such a good point about once this gets started, does it ever stop? And I actually do sympathize with the president about how this doesn't look like it's going to ever end. That's what he's thinking. This is never ever going to end, and I've got this chain around my ankle. It's never going to be unlocked.
And if you're Bill Clinton or Donald Trump, or for that matter, George W. Bush, all of whom had to deal with special prosecutors, they're looking under your hood, and yeah, they're finding mold, but they're also finding other stuff that could be mold, could not be mold, but either way, you got to hire a lawyer and pay a lot of money, and
Yeah.
you got to defend yourself.
Sure enough.
And if you're president of the United States, I know this is true with Bill Clinton, you want to run the country. You want to do the work that you were elected to do. And you don't want to spend all of your time with this kind of nasty politics where you have everything in your life is being exposed. And sure, people make mistakes, but come on, guys. We got to run a country.
One last thing. So much of the constitutional conversation that's been going on from Dershowitz and at Harvard and down here, this was absolutely unprecedented. The personal counsel to the President of the United States had a no-knock warrant executed by the feds. Okay, this unprecedented in the extreme. And I would just submit to you, if there was there enough to convince the FBI, the Justice Department, and or a judge to go do this, then I want to know more about it.
I tell you one thing, Bobby Kennedy never would let that happen to Jack Kennedy. No. And I don't think Eric Holder would have ever let that happen to Barack Obama.
It just happened.
If I am Donald Trump, I want to kill Jeff Sessions.
Well,
Because,
discretion is the better part of valor, and this president got himself into a lot of this trouble by making comments on Twitter, by saying something on Air Force One the other day that he probably shouldn't have.
Let's just have a little bit of a discussion on the third topic, which has to do with what do our political parties stand for right now. And I want to hear from Rom first because we were talking about this before. The parties seem to me to be evolving. The Democratic Party has become much more urban and much more of a coalition of different ethnic groups. But that coalition seems to be much more funded by rich elites. The Republican Party seems to be evolving from a suburban party to a white ethnic party and rural party to a larger extent than had been in the past. What do the Democrats in your mind stand for, and can that withstand the scrutiny of the voters?
I think the Democratic Party right now is experiencing a lot of excitement beneath the surface, and you're seeing it. It pops up every now and then. You see it. You saw it happen in Virginia, a close race that the Democrats pulled out. You saw it happen in Alabama, where Doug Jones beat a flawed Republican candidate, but that was not without a surprising amount of turnout. I think you saw it with Conor Lamb in Pennsylvania, and from what I'm hearing in my home state in Tennessee, there is more excitement. There hasn't been this much excitement in the Democratic ranks in Tennessee since 1992. That was Clinton Gore's first run for the White House when they won. And what that means, John, is you're seeing people who haven't really contributed to the Democratic Party since 1992, who are basically making calls to party headquarters saying, where do I write my check? How do I do this now? So it's a kind of there's an energy and an enthusiasm in the Democratic Party, and I think without getting into what that is all about, what is it that they stand for, it's met on the other side by silence. I think a kind of an acquiescence, because the president has taken so much air out of the room of the Republican, of the Republican Party. So I think that we're moving. This is my theory, Rahm's theory. The Democratic Party is moving, and I'd go further and say it needs to move beyond this question of identity politics. And as it moves successfully beyond identity politics, it begins to pick up votes again in the rural parts, in the counties that have been ignored by the Democratic Party of the last 16, 20 years. And that is what really poses the threat. As it moves beyond identity politics and into this larger message of, getting back to the business of governing, doing what's right for people, doing right by people, the Democratic Party really can cut deep into some of these counties that have gone so red over the last 20 years.
John, I want you to respond to that. What are your thoughts about where the Republican Party is going?
Well, first about the Democratic Party. Of course, I can't help myself, but I think you're right, Ram, about enthusiasm, and I take you at your word because you know much better than I do. But I still see Elizabeth Warren. I still see people like Kamala Harris and Bernie Sanders, and I just wonder, and just this energy of the far left, and I wonder how that's going to reconcile itself with the kind of the Democrats who like to play, as we say, between the 40-yard lines and can really reach across the aisle, which is great for Tennessee and great for North Dakota and great for Virginia and even Missouri. But on the Republican side, I think there's some schizophrenia going on, I think, because you cannot underestimate the power of what Trump tapped into and what he effectively is able to represent on a fairly regular basis, on a daily basis, really. And what's powerful about what Trump does is, and I've been amazed by this for 2 years now, is that he is not an elitist. And it's just an amazing message that he doesn't even try to do. He just is. Here's this wealthy Manhattan, New York real estate magnate, and he's actually not a country club Republican. I mean, it's weird. Yes, he likes to play golf at his resorts and everything, but that's not how he talks. That's not how he acts, and it's actually really good for the party. I'm not talking about his behavior. I'm not talking about his spastic twittering habit. I'm talking about just the way he's able to not be an elitist. Barack Obama was an elitist, and it absolutely hacked off half the electorate. But you have to then, the schizophrenia part of this is, look what we just passed under a Republican majority and Republican president. An enormous omnibus spending bill that is going to add about $1 trillion to the deficit. There's absolutely no spending discipline. There's no fiscal discipline, which I think that the Republicans have been about or supposedly have been about for a long time. Trade. I mean, we're all over the map. You've got a Speaker of the House and a majority leader in the Senate who are pro-trade. You've got a president that is, cracking down, putting up tariff, or at least threatening tariffs, threatening a trade war. So some of the Republican principles are just kind of getting whipsawed here, and I'm not sure where we're headed, but I think we need to kind of figure it out pretty quickly because we are heading into a midterm.
John, I think this is important, and I'm going to turn to you, Adam, in just 1 second, but I do think that you're talking about attitude versus issues. The Republican attitude is anti-elitist now, whereas the Democrats had always been the anti-elite party. They had been kind of the working class party, but they're transforming themselves into a more of an internationalist party. That you have to have a broader understanding of what's happening in the rest of the world and our place in the world. Whereas Republicans are like, we're pro-American, we're sticking to pro-American, and that's who we are, and we're America first. And that's what Trump brings, is that attitude. And the issues are kind of not nearly as important to him as the attitude about sticking up for America. Adam, I'll let you throw in there.
Well, in the Washington tradition of everything's been said, but not everybody has said it, I will quite honestly defer. I like what I heard from everybody. I don't have a lot to add. As a Republican, I find myself so often nonplussed. I don't like to buttonhole myself as a conservative. I am who I am. I affiliate with the Republican Party, and I do support the vast majority of this president's legislative agenda, I don't know where the parties are going. I feel as lost as so many others of how we all individually fit in. So I like your theories, and it's a burning question, and we got to continue to follow the bouncing ball on it.
Yeah, I mean, to pick up on that, where the parties are changing. And the question is, who's leading that change? And to Rahm's perspective, the Democratic Party is being led at the grassroots level, and it seems to be that there's part of that wants to be pragmatic, which is from the red states, and then there's part of that that wants to be, ideological, from the Elizabeth Warren side. And from the Republican side, you have the Mitt Romneys and Paul Ryans who were very idealistic, and then the gut punchers who are the Trump folks. And so both parties have their kind of tensions, and it's really unclear to see who wins out. But we do know right now is that it's no longer the party of George W. Bush; it's the party of Donald Trump, and we all are kind of stuck with it.
Yeah, I think your party is waging culture wars and leaving the middle open, and Democrats are eager to move right into that space. And I'll tell you one other thing: we don't need to sacrifice our social justice agenda to move into that space. And I spoke to a conservative Democrat in Tennessee the other day, and I was a little surprised to hear this, but he didn't have any use for his assault weapon anymore. He couldn't really look at his assault weapon anymore, and he said he was going to give it up. It was not something that he felt comfortable with.
What was his original use for it?
I mean, I think he enjoyed it. There was no limit to him having it, and there was no reason he shouldn't have one, and so he had one. But in light of recent events, it turned his stomach to even contemplate owning it. Same with his grandfather's Confederate flag, which was a part of his culture and a part of his heritage. Seeing it used alongside a Nazi flag in a demonstration in Charlottesville, Virginia, made him want to put the flag away for a while, fold it up and put it away. The culture wars are turning good Democrats off, and we're getting back to kind of a pragmatic, approach to winning elections that combines the social justice agenda with a wide open middle. And I think you're leaving the middle wide open, and I think Democrats are going to take it.
Yeah, I don't know if we're in a culture war, and I say that in part because our party leaders, the Republican Party leaders, Donald Trump is not a culture warrior. Paul Ryan is not a culture warrior, and Mitch McConnell certainly isn't a culture warrior. He's about as inside and tactician as you can get. I do think some of the Republican voters, especially some that are sort of new to the process at the grassroots level, yes, some of those are, and that's how they got into the process. That's what brought them into the process. So not sure where that's taking us. It could be taking us to sort of these wingbat primary candidates that John was talking about. Is a good point. But I don't see this as a culture war right now. I think part of where the culture war is Donald Trump's sort of erratic behavior becomes a bit of a cultural topic, and then people start making moral judgments about everybody, whether you're pro-Trump or anti-Trump and all that. That becomes a bit of a culture war in and of itself.
Well, I think it depends on how you define culture war. I mean, if you're Trump is clearly someone who's an immigration restrictionist and not someone who where Paul Ryan was an immigration reformist, and I think that a lot of the Democrats see that as a cultural warrior type of thing. I mean, Trump is not really a religious warrior because he's not really that religious, but Mike Pence certainly bolsters him on some of that stuff. As far as I think that Democrats, I disagree with you. I think a lot of Democrats do believe in culture wars. I mean, I think that if you talk about gay rights and things like that, the same-sex marriage, for them, that's the culture that they want to impose on the Catholic Church. This was actually a big part of the reaction against Obamacare, was what they tried to do to the church, and you had the Little Sisters of the Poor. So I mean, the culture war stuff is on both sides. I think the fact is that rural America is in a different place largely than the big cities on a lot of of these cultural issues and they always have been. But the question is, if you're a Democrat in a rural red state, you want to talk about pragmatic values because you largely know that talking about these cultural issues is not that great for you politically. And I would make one other observation. When the economy is going well, Republicans typically turn to cultural issues because that works better for them. The big question in this election, because the economy is going well, will the cultural issues like gun control and other issues work for the Democrats? And to your point about your friend who put away his gun, there was one other guy who did not put away his gun, and that was Connor Lamb, who used his gun during a campaign commercial. So I'm still not quite certain if gun control is the winning issue for Democrats that they think it is. It might very well be.
I don't say it'll never be a winning issue for Democrats in red states.
Right.
Gun control is not going to be what you don't lead with gun control in a red state. What you do lead with, and I think this is an easy answer to the effectiveness of Donald Trump's particular brand of populism.
Right.
The effective response to that is to say, if what he proposes is good for the people in my state, I'm for it. And if what he proposes is not good for the people of my state, I'm not for it. And it doesn't really matter to me who it's coming from. That is a way to co-opt, in a sense, the populist appeal of Donald Trump without sacrificing or losing anything. Democrats can run in an environment where Donald Trump has a 56% approval rating in the state of Tennessee. I just saw that today.
They have no choice. I mean, some of these states, he won by 20 plus. And I think you're exactly right. That is the answer. The question is, we're talking about Senate candidates right now. Joe Manchin of West Virginia, just like Arkansas with Blanche Lincoln, it just became too red for Blanche Lincoln. She did everything she could to come into the center and even go against her party. Joe Manchin, I think, has tried to do that from time to time. He voted against the tax bill. That could be a fatal blow for him. But they really have no choice but to do exactly what you're saying in order to win, which is just to say, hey, it's really about our state. And, and Donald Trump, I like what he said on X. It's exactly what you have to say.
And I think ultimately the test of any politician, especially a federal office holder, is if they can adequately represent their states. And one of my biggest frustrations is when people put ideology above their state interests. Because you're sent here to represent your state. You're just not here to represent your own personal opinions. So I'll say that. All right, we're going to conclude this by asking all of our friends here around the table, what are you buying or selling today? And John Easton, I'm going to go with you first.
What are we buying or selling today? I'm just going to flat out buy the Washington Nationals. I know that around here, there's some talk that, hey, they're at 500. Uh-oh. Here we go. But they're going to be fine, and they're going to, they're right their ship. They're only down 4.5 games for the Mets. They've played how many games, John, have they played?
Like a dozen.
12 or something like that. And I'm also going to buy, because I'm a great Washington area fan, I'm going to buy the Washington Capitals. They open tonight against the Columbus Blue Jackets, and they're going to take this series and move on to the next round.
All right, Ron, what are you buying or selling?
I'm buying Gonzaga Eagles.
Oh.
I'm real proud of the job my son Adam has done playing on their JV baseball team, and they're a great group of boys, and I'm very high on them. I love that school, and so proud of my son. The other thing I'm buying is red state Democrats. I think red state Democrats are well positioned to make a big difference in the margins, especially in the United States Senate. And so I'm high on red state Democrats.
Adam Belmar, what are you buying or selling today?
I am buying Facebook stock, and I am buying Amazon stock. I am a bit contrarian, perhaps, in that, but DC has decided to pick a fight with two enormously successful, wonderful American companies, and I think the sky remains the limit for them, and I'm going to hitch my wagon and my stock portfolio there, too.
So I have to scramble now because I was going to do both Gonzaga and Facebook. And so this is going to be me.
Zuckerberg, straight ahead.
What I want to buy right now is Commonwealth Joe. We have
When in doubt,
Right, just
brand
grab
new
the cup.
keg of Commonwealth Joe. This is tastes great. It gives you the boost you need,
And it's less filling.
and it's less.
you know,
fun.
it's how I stay thin.
It's how stays thin, and how I stay thin. I would also I'm going to buy. The theory of buying and selling is you buy low and sell high, and then under that theory, I'm going to buy the Republican majority because nobody believes they have any chance of winning. I think they're going to keep the House. I think it's going to be a much more slender majority, and so I'm going to buy the Republican majority under the speakership of Kevin McCarthy. And that's where I am right now. You know what, Ron? Really great to have you here at the Feehery Theory podcast, brought to you by EFB Advocacy. EFB means
Excellent for business.
yeah,
Yeah,
baby.
baby.